Alright, hello YouTube. So I haven't ever made a video about this before, but I kind of wanted to finally, so I'm going to today. For the past 3 years, I've had a huge variety of symptoms. Some of them have been very scary, some of them have been pretty terrible. My body just feels like it's attacking itself all the time, so for the past 3 years I've kind of figured something is probably wrong. When I was a kid, there were some things that happened, like small symptoms that I didn't pay a lot of attention to. I just figured that's just something that happens to people every now and then. But yeah, in the past 3 years, a lot of stuff has just blown up, and I feel like I've taken a turn for the worse. But yeah, I'll be okay, but I just wanted to make a video and talk about my experience, the process of getting a diagnosis, just everything I've been going through. So yeah, I'll start with just explaining a few things when I was a kid. I had hives all over my body. That would happen pretty often. I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd wake up my mom and I'd be like, there's spots all over me. And sometimes she would make me like oatmeal baths to get rid of the hives. She gave me like Aveeno creams and stuff like that. So yeah, I got hives all the time and I was like, probably just allergies, whatever. And also when I was younger, when I got up from chairs sometimes, I'd see black spots everywhere and my vision would like black out for a few seconds and come back. And I was like, maybe that's not normal, but like there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine. And one day on the playground in elementary school, I fainted. I don't remember the process of fainting, I just remember waking up on the ground, on the sand. I was looking up, everything was all blue in my vision, and I had hit my spine a little bit, so I couldn't speak for like 10 minutes. Then my voice came back to me. But yeah, I had no idea why I fainted back then until recently. I think I might know now. But yeah, just little things like that happened when I was younger, and I never really thought they were connected or that there was like any like big thing wrong with me. I was diagnosed with asthma at age 14. I started getting migraines when I was 17. I've had chronic postnasal drip where like stuff like drains from the back of your nose into your mouth. I've had that like since my early 20s, I think, so I've had that for a while, but again, just figured it was allergies. And then in 2018, I started having some GI problems. Not going to go into too much detail with those, but I had a colonoscopy done. That's where a doctor puts you to sleep and like checks around in there to see what's going on. And I had hemorrhoids, which is not a huge deal. It wasn't a big problem. But then after that procedure, like a week later, I started getting these loud hiccups, and they sound like ugh. And that happens to me probably like 20 times a day, and it's really embarrassing because I'll be like with someone and all of a sudden I'll just do that and they'll be like, what? Because it's like not a burp, but it's like a really weird sounding hiccup. So yeah, that's been happening since 2018, between like 10 to like 40 times a day. I'll just do that at random and I don't know why. But yeah. Now we're moving into the bigger stuff. In June of 2019, I was having asthma issues, and I have a nebulizer. It's like a machine where you put on a mask and it like puts like albuterol into your lungs so you can breathe better. So I was like, I'm having trouble breathing, I'm gonna use my nebulizer. And then I was out of albuterol, the stuff you usually put in it. So my doctor gave me stuff called Ipratropium, and they were like, this works just the same. You can put this in your nebulizer and it will do the same thing, it'll help you breathe. So I put that in my nebulizer, and then I started feeling really weird. My heart rate dropped down into like the low 50s. I felt like I couldn't move. I was just laying in bed, like I could not move. and my boyfriend was with me, and he said that my mouth on the left side just fell down and I was like slurring my words, and it seemed like I was having a stroke. And after about 2 hours, all the effects were gone. I didn't really think it was a stroke because I could still move. It was just like I felt really weak and sluggish. So yeah, I don't think it was an actual stroke, but it certainly was similar to one. But like I said, I was fine 2 hours later. I was totally fine the next day. So I didn't actually see a doctor for that problem. Then in August of 2019, so just like a couple months later, I hadn't really thought of that like stroke-ish moment for a while. But then I started feeling really fatigued again, and I kind of felt like my eye was just like wanting to like fall down, or like somebody just had their finger here and was just pushing it down constantly. And I also felt like my mouth was wanting to droop on this side again. And I was like, I wonder if this has something to do with the reaction I had a couple months ago. So I was like, I better go see a doctor and see what's going on. So I saw my doctor, and I told him what had happened 2 months before, and I told him my current symptoms, and he was like, I don't want you to be too worried, but I think you might have something called Myasthenia Gravis, and you'll have to see your neurologist and he can tell you if you actually have it. In the meantime, just don't worry about it. You may or may not have it. So I was like, okay. And I forgot the name that he said completely, because like that's a hard name to remember, Myasthenia Gravis. So I was like, I'll just wait and see what the neurologist says. But the neurologist couldn't see me until December, which was months later, so I had to wait a while. But like a few days after I saw my primary care doctor and he told me I might have that, my whole body felt so weak all of a sudden. It was really hard to move across a room, just an extreme chore doing anything. And I was so upset. I was like, what is wrong with me? So I Googled my symptoms, and the first thing that came up was Myasthenia Gravis. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I do have that. I totally do have that. And what it is where all the muscles in your body, they just get tired out really easily. They get weak really easily. Anytime you move your muscles, they just get weak. And that includes muscles to chew your food, to swallow, the muscles that help you breathe. So like you can have trouble breathing with Myasthenia Gravis. And I was so scared. I was praying to God. I was asking why, how could this happen to me? I was healthy. How does this just all of a sudden happen to somebody? I was just miserable. And that whole weakness throughout my whole body lasted for 2 weeks. And then one day I was in the middle of working at my job, and I just felt like really bad chest pain and like I couldn't breathe. And I was like, yeah, this is just part of the Myasthenia Gravis. I can't breathe because my breathing muscles are weak. And I called out of work, and I didn't work again for like a week or two because I just like felt like I couldn't. And then it kind of subsided a bit, but after that point it would come and go. Like I would go out and run errands, and it was the middle of the summer and it would be so hot, and I'd get out and go into a store for 5 minutes, and by the time I got back to my car I just felt like I could not move. My eyes wanted to fall down, my face wanted to fall down. It was a chore just moving, and that would just like happen sometimes, just on and off. Like some moments I'd feel okay, and some moments I'd feel extremely weak and fatigued and just terrible, and I was so positive I had Myasthenia Gravis. And then in September 2019, I started getting a lot of infections. I got oral thrush in my mouth. That's just like when white stuff appears on your tongue, and you just take antibiotics or antifungal medicine, and it gets rid of it. But I also had 2 separate ear infections. I had an infection of my small intestine. It was called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Again, you take some sort of antibiotics for that, I think. I had yeah, I was getting like styes on my eyes. I was getting like my lips would swell up randomly. I was just getting like infections everywhere. And I've also had 3 kidney infections throughout my life. So yeah, just a bunch of infections on top of all of the weakness. And then I saw an allergist and I told her some of my symptoms. And she told me that she thinks I have an autoimmune disease. She's like, I'm pretty sure you definitely have an autoimmune disease. That's what she said. So I was like, okay, a doctor just told me I have an autoimmune disease. Pretty sure that means I have one. And then I kept getting really short of breath, like really often, feeling like I couldn't breathe. And every time that happened, I'd get put on prednisone for like 4 days just to like calm my body down. And then it would happen again like a month later and I'd get put on prednisone again. That just like gets rid of inflammation in your body, and it can help you breathe again. If your lungs are inflamed, it'll bring it down and then you can breathe again. But then I started testing negative for myasthenia gravis. I had a blood test done and there's like multiple different tests you can get done to determine if you have myasthenia gravis. Some people who have it will only test positive on one of them. So I just had one of those tests done and I tested negative. So like that doesn't necessarily mean I don't have it. It just means that I didn't have that particular form of it. But there's like different tests that they would still have to do to determine if I had it or not. I then started having terrible neck pain when I woke up sometimes. Sometimes it would go up the back of like the top of my spine and into my head and turn into a migraine. And it would last for like, the neck pain would last for like 3 days and it was really severe. I started getting blurry vision. I started getting sensitive to lights. I started having pain in my eyes. I would see like bright spots and dark spots all the time, and I would get dizzy frequently. I started getting pins and needles in my limbs all the time. So because I tested negative on the one myasthenia gravis test and because of all these new symptoms that popped up, doctors were like, okay, maybe you don't have myasthenia gravis, maybe you have MS. Then I finally saw my neurologist. He did another myasthenia gravis test, which was called an EMG, where they stick needles into your muscles and send shocks through them. That's the most awful test I've ever gone through. Hopefully the most awful test I will ever need to go through. But that one came up negative. And because that one came up negative, the neurologist I was seeing, he said, you know, I have to be honest with patients sometimes. He looked me in the eye and said this, I need to tell you that you need to see a therapist. He thought it was all in my head. He thought I was crazy. He thought I wasn't experiencing any of the symptoms I told him I was, and that I just needed to see a therapist. He looked me in the eye and said that. Yeah, so that was a lovely experience. I felt so defeated. I had waited so long to see a neurologist just for him to tell me that. And I even began to question, I'm like, is this all in my head? So now we are at 2020 and 2021. I started to feel better in general in 2020. I didn't have symptoms as often. I felt good a lot of the time, but I would still have these symptoms on and off, the facial and leg muscle weakness. Sometimes I'd be walking and my leg would just start shaking uncontrollably. It was like so wobbly and it was really hard to walk, and I was so embarrassed if that would happen in public because people would stare at me because I'd be walking so weird and I'd be like, don't look at me, I can't help it. It was really embarrassing. But yeah, I had all the weakness symptoms on and off, the shortness of breath on and off. Prednisone would always fix it. I kept getting pins and needles in all of my limbs, random pains here and there, soreness in my muscles. I just wouldn't feel so good sometimes. Like 50% of the time in 2020 and 2021, I'd feel good. 50% I would not. And I had some really bad chest pains and left arm pain last year, I think, in 2020. And so I went to an urgent care and got an EKG, and it came up abnormal. An EKG is what checks how your heart is doing. I had an abnormal ST/T wave, and it felt like my heart was racing a lot of the time, and I kept getting chest pains, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And I was really scared when he told me my EKG was abnormal. Then I went to a cardiologist, and my EKG was abnormal again. Then he did a stress test where you run on a treadmill and they like monitor your heart through that, and that came up fine. And so that made me feel a lot better knowing that that came up fine. So the cardiologist wasn't really concerned anymore because that came up fine. He said the abnormal ST/T wave can happen for a number of reasons, but that he's not going to worry about it because my other test was fine. But I kept having a racing heart rate at random times. I was feeling dizzy a lot of the time, and I kept having the chest pains. Then in 2021, like early this year, I woke up with a rash on both of my cheeks, and I looked up online what that could be, and it said lupus, and I still didn't have a diagnosis at this point, so I'm like, okay, I don't think I have Myasthenia Gravis or MS anymore. They did test me for MS at one point. I had an MRI of my brain, and they did find a lesion on my brain. But in order to diagnose you with MS, you have to have multiple lesions. They also did an MRI of my spine. I didn't have any lesions on there. So MS was kind of ruled out also. So everything was getting ruled out, and I was like, it had been like 2 or 3 years at this point, and I just felt so terrible having all these weird things happening to me and not knowing why, not having an answer, not having a diagnosis. But yeah, I woke up with this rash on my cheeks early this year. I was wondering if it was lupus, and I saw online that if you think you might have lupus, you go to a rheumatologist. I told her all of my symptoms, and she ran some blood work, and it came up that I had high C4A in my blood, high CRP in my blood, and positive ANA. And if you look online, if all those things are positive and high in your blood with a face rash, it generally, I shouldn't say generally, it could mean you have lupus. But my rheumatologist that I went to, she just shrugged it off. She's like, nah, you're fine. One thing I will tell you though is I can tell that you're hypermobile. She was like moving my arm around like this. She's like, yeah, you're definitely hypermobile. So you're gonna need to see this specialist because I think you might have Ehlers-Danlos. Ehlers-Danlos is where you're really hypermobile. Like, I don't know, you can do little tricks like this. Can touch my foot to my head. Yeah, you can just do things like that other people can't. You can stretch in ways that other people can't. You also have stretchy skin. You have like kind of clear looking skin where you can see your veins, and like soft skin. There's like a bunch of different criteria that you have to meet for it. So I went to this specialist that she suggested that I see, and he said I only meet 5 of the criteria, and you have to meet at least 6 of the 11 criteria to be diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos. So I was almost there, but not quite. So he said he thinks that the criteria is kind of arbitrary and that I could have Ehlers-Danlos. He just can't diagnose me with it because I don't have quite enough information. So he said he'll just say I have hypermobility spectrum disorder. He said it's basically the same thing. I probably do have Ehlers-Danlos. He just can't diagnose it. So there's that. And then he ordered some blood tests for me. Once again, more blood tests, yay. And these blood tests, when I went in to get them done, I fainted. And I saw online that there is another disease disorder, illness, I don't know what to call it, that comes with Ehlers-Danlos a lot of the time, called POTS, which stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome. And I just thought it's where you faint a lot. I didn't know anything else about it. But I asked the doctor, because I fainted when I got the blood test, I was like, do you think maybe I could also have POTS? And he was like, well, we could definitely look into that. So he ordered a tilt table test for me, which is where they have you lie down on a table and then they slowly raise you up so you're standing, but you're still strapped to the table. And if your heart rate goes up at least 30 beats per minute and stays that way for a long time, I think that's how they diagnose POTS, and the blood flow cut off to my brain. My heart rate did go up at least 30 beats per minute, and the blood flow cut off to my brain when I was stood up. So they did diagnose me with POTS. That's the first diagnosis I've gotten after 3 years. And I didn't know what to think because Myasthenia Gravis seemed to fit my symptoms so much better. Lupus seemed to fit my symptoms better, even MS. And I was so confused. I'm like, why POTS? Like, I've been waiting for a diagnosis for so long, I should feel relieved, but like, this one doesn't make sense. But I looked it up online. It does make sense. That could be why I fainted when I was young. It could be why I always see black spots when I stand up from a chair. To this day, I still see black spots and bright spots everywhere when I stand up from laying down for a while. POTS is basically just when you stand up. When a normal person stands up, their body regulates their heart rate and their blood pressure and everything, and they make blood go up to your head as soon as you stand up. When you have POTS, when you stand up, your autonomic nervous system doesn't work, so it doesn't bring blood up to your head. So you like get blood flow cut off to your head, and blood can pool in your feet and your hands because it doesn't rise up fast enough. And so I get pins and needles all the time, as I said, like this tingly feeling in my limbs. I get that all the time, and sometimes it hurts because it's so tingly. That's from POTS. And weakness and fatigue can also happen from POTS. I get dizzy sometimes. The black spots I see, as I said, all of that. So actually a lot of my symptoms do go along with POTS. The migraines that I get, those can go along with POTS. So a lot more than you think. And when you have POTS, your temperature control is kind of off too. So you get like really cold and really hot at random times, and you like sweat more or less than normal people. Your like sweat isn't controlled well. And I do have all of that. So POTS does make sense. I did get that diagnosis. And then there's one more thing. MCAS often comes with POTS and Ehlers-Danlos. I'm not good at explaining this one. It's mast cell activation disorder. It basically just makes it seem like you're allergic all the time and you have like reactions to everything, which would explain the hives I get. It would explain the stomach problems I get, stuff like that, and the postnasal drip that I always have. So MCAS would make sense for me, but the doctor said that there isn't really a way to test for it. He did some blood tests, which are the ones that I fainted during, and I went back and got them done a second time. But it didn't really show that I had MCAS, but he said oftentimes people who have MCAS, it doesn't show up in their blood. So he said there is no real good way to diagnose it, but he thinks I have it and he can treat it. So I have been taking Claritin and Pepcid twice a day. When you take those together, they work as like H1 blockers and H2 blockers. I don't know if that's the correct letters and numbers, but they work together to fight MCAS. So I've been taking those. And I'm not on any medication for POTS yet. However, I have flare-ups sometimes where my limbs will be tingly and sore for days and my heart rate will keep jumping up at random times. So So he gave me some medicine for when I'm in a flare-up that lasts like a while. I can take the medicine and it'll like fix the symptoms. I haven't taken it yet, but I'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's my story. I'm sorry, this was such a long video. I apologize. But yeah, some people just have invisible illnesses. Like, I don't look sick because I put on makeup. I just go about my day the best I can. I'm not really disabled. I can do most things, but I feel really bad a lot of the time. Yeah, so that's what an invisible illness is. Your body is just fighting you on the inside and no one can see it on the outside, but it feels terrible for the person going through it. So yeah, I still feel like I may have other things like MG and MS and stuff like that. I guess Myasthenia Gravis and multiple sclerosis or lupus. I still don't know. I might have one of those. I might have something else. I feel like I'm not done piecing the puzzle together, but I feel like I finally got a huge part of it, and I'm so grateful to have a diagnosis because it's hell not having a diagnosis. Just having all this stuff wrong with you, nobody believes you, you don't know what's wrong with you. That was the most terrible part, so it's a huge relief to have a diagnosis. And I mainly made this video if people are going through similar stuff to me. Maybe this can help give them some information and help you feel not alone. So that was my purpose in making this video. If you got through this whole thing, you are the best. Comment, like, subscribe. Yeah. Bye.